Hello, my name is David Borges. I'm a local chiropractic doctor in South Lake Tahoe, California, and a local historian. Today we're going to be talking about who's Al of Al Tahoe. Al Tahoe is a community in South Lake Tahoe that was one of the first developed communities in the lake and around the lake. And what we've done is the Lake Tahoe Historical Society has put together a historical experience through Al Tahoe. We're going to be walking through the Al Tahoe neighborhood and talking about the historical issues and different facts as we go along. But before we get started with the program, I always like to start off, you know you're a Tahoe local if you know that Carson Pass is in Alpine County. You know Carson Lake is in Churchill County. You know Carson City is in Eagle Valley, and you also know Minden and Gardnerville are in Carson Valley. It takes a few years to figure all that out. But let's get started with the program. One of the original settlements prior to the city of South Lake Tahoe that came together in 1965. This is a map of South Lake Tahoe, and the red line is Highway 50. And there's a lot of different developments, little jurisdictions. One of them is Tahoe Keys. The other is Tahoe Island Park. We have an area in South Lake Tahoe called the State Streets, and of course the Y. We have another little local area, little general improvement district called Sky Meadows, little developments. It's Gardner Mountain and in Tahoe Valley. And we also have what's called the industrial area, Highland Woods, the Sierra Track. And the one we're going to be talking about today of the little communities is going to be Al Tahoe. But there's others. There's Bijou Park, there's Bijou Pine, there's Tahoe Meadows, Lakeside Park, State Line, Heavenly Valley, Montgomery Estates, Pioneer Village, and so on. But those all came together and became the city of South Lake Tahoe in 1965. But we're going to be talking about the Al Tahoe area. And to understand Al Tahoe history, you must keep in mind that the current street grid does not conform at all to the original dirt trails that came in. And those dirt trails were probably Indian trails before the white men came and settled in the South Lake Tahoe, and there was probably deer trails before the Indians had it. But we're going what you see now is is totally different than what was back then. But there are the dirt trails, and significant historical sites were concealed by housing developments and paved roads that occurred here in the South Shore in the 1930s. And in the 1930s there was a rerouting of the current Highway 50, and it was on purpose, and it was to change the traffic from Lakeview Avenue that goes right along the lake and all the housing that was on that lake from a commercial byway, and then became a residential street after that. But let's stop and look at the 1925 map before what I call the new 1930-1931 Highway 50 came in. And this is what the old grid looked like. You can see where Lake House is in Rollins. Later on it became Rollins. We're going to talk a lot about how Rollins became Rollins. But the Pioneer Trail, that was used the most. Between 1859 and to the early 1930s, this was the highway grid of South Lake Tahoe. You can see Pioneer Trail in the yellow that went from Myers to State Line, and that's pretty much what it is today. That hasn't changed much, and that's what all the wagon trains did, and all the people that are going through South Lake Tahoe. That's the ones that they use the most. But they would be, on occasion, do a cutoff that would get closer to the lake and go to a hotel. the first hotel on the shore of Lake Tahoe. They originally called it the Lake House, and later on they called it the Rollins. But that road, that blue line there, was from 1859 to the early 1930s. And then, in the 1930s, the new grid just went over the old grid. And you can see where the Y is, and you can see how it's changed. And it's not anywhere near what the old grid was. And you can see this little red line in there. That red line was part of the old Lincoln Highway when it first got started and went through South Lake Tahoe in 1913. And that road's not there at all anymore. There's not even any road that matches it. They just took that one all the way out. So the first structure in the Al Tahoe area, and actually on the lake shore, and the first hotel on Lake Shore, is this structure right here. It was built in 1859, and they call it the Lake House. And one of the significant features of the Lake House that you can see is this white heading over the door. You knew you were at the Lake House if you saw that, and you can see that from a distance. Now here's a 1940 grid of Al Tahoe on the south shore of Lake Tahoe. And you can see the new highway and part of the old grid, and you can see part of the old highway on this grid. But right about there in that red spot was where Lake House is. Now there's no structure left at Lake House. There's no reason to go out there. There's no foundations. There's nothing left. And there's it's not even in a residential area anymore. It's on the outside. It's been torn down and taken away. But here's what Al Tahoe looks like in 2011. And you can see where the street grid is and where the Lake House was. And there's absolutely nothing there other than some trees and some beach, but that's where the Lake House was supposed to be. And the red dot is the old Lincoln Highway. That was from the Highway 50 over here. You would go down Lakeview, what is now known as Lakeview Avenue. That was the old highway. But you had a lot of houses in here as well, housing development. And they decided the people that lived in these houses on the lakeshore decided they didn't want as much traffic, so they had gone to Sacramento and asked them to change the route of Highway 50. So it went away from Lakeview Avenue and down past the meadow and then over across to Pioneer Trail. But right now, what you see is this Lake Tahoe Boulevard, also known as Highway 50. And the Lakeview Avenue is now just a residential area, as well as all of this area is called Al Tahoe. But we haven't got to who's Al yet. But Al Tahoe area history, you got to think about 5 different owners. The first owners were in 1859 a man named Judge Seneca Dean. Now he wasn't a judge; his name was Judge, and also a man named William Lapham, who later on had a hotel closer to State Line, and Robert Dean, Judge Seneca Dean's nephew. And they built the Lake House in 1859. But it burned down in 1866, so they only had it there for a few years. And there was a man named Thomas Rowland in 1868 came into town, and he built a large 8-bedroom house, and he named it, conveniently, Rowlands. And actually there was a small village that formed there. It wasn't a very large village. It was just it was the Rowlands Lake House, Rowlands Hotel. It was a cobbler was there. There's a store that was there, and 5 or 6 different residences. So it was a small town. I often compare it to Kybers in Highway 50 from South Lake Tahoe going to Placerville or going on to Sacramento. There's a little town called Kybers. And on the side of Kybers, I think represents Rowlands the best. The sign says, "Welcome to Kybers," and on the same side it says, "Goodbye." and so it was a small place, but it did last for quite a few years. Until 1886, the little town of Rowlands literally picked up and moved to Bijou, which was about a mile east of where Rowlands was. And the reason they moved to Bijou is that's where the logging trains were. That's where the lumbermen were, and they could sell their goods. So they took the houses that were left there and just moved them on over to Bijou. And it was 1907, and a man named Al, or his formal name is Almarin, And he had a wife named Almira, but they all called her Myra. And their last name was Sprague, and they built the Al Tahoe Hotel. And we'll see some pictures of this 3-story building with a widow's walk on top. It's a huge structure. It was built in the Al Tahoe area, and Mr. Sprague came up and named that area Al Tahoe after himself or after his wife. We're really not sure who was it named after. But from that point on, from 1907, that location there was named Al Tahoe. It had a post office there, and Mr. Sprague was a postmaster, and it just stuck. But in 1913, not too many years later, the Lincoln Highway came through Lakeview Avenue. Lincoln Highway was the first transcontinental highway in the United States. Went all the way from New York to San Francisco, California. And it came through Reno. And in Reno, you had a chance to go on to what's now known as Highway 40 over Donner Summit, or you could take the Pioneer Trail, which was south, and you can go through Carson City, and then up to Spooner Summit, to Lake Tahoe, and past on the south shore here in Lake Tahoe, and then you would go past what now is known as State Line. If you stayed on the road there, you had to make a choice. Where Pioneer Trail and Highway 50 meet now, you could stay on Pioneer Trail and go on to Placerville, or you could take the Lakeview route and go around Lake Tahoe or around Emerald Bay. And if you did that, you would go on Lakeview Avenue. And in 1924, friends of the Spragues moved to Lake Tahoe, named Frank Globin and his wife Esther, and they purchased the Al Tahoe Hotel from the Spragues and many of the surrounding lots, and they developed that as a hotel and resort area. And you'll see there's a lot of things were happening. It got real large, and we'll get a chance to see more about Mr. Globin in just a few minutes. And in the 1930s, there were bonds that were sold to pave Highway 50. It was during the Depression, and they figured that one way they can get people back to work is to make roads. Well, they sold the bonds, and the South Shore route dramatically changed. Globin ended up having to build his Globin Motor Inn next to the new highway because nobody was coming across the old Al Tahoe Inn, and it was just off the beaten path. And then after World War II, a gentleman named Aram Hartunian, and he bought a lot of lots in Al Tahoe, subdivided the Al Tahoe area, and he was the gentleman that would sell lots for $10 down and $10 a month for $1,500 lots. No interest. But let's go on our walk. You can see where the numbers are, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes all the way to 14. And that's going to be our walk. Each one of those areas in Al Tahoe has a historical significance, and we're going to be talking about that as we go through this. And we're going to use this map as we go on our walk. If you go to the Lake Tahoe Historical Society Museum, that's where we begin our walk. And if you can see this right off of Highway 50 or Lake Tahoe Boulevard are the same things. You can see John C. Fremont mural on the current Lake Tahoe Historical Museum building. The historical building before it became a museum was the South Tahoe Library. And across the walkway from that, or the driveway from the Historical Museum, was the first medical building in South Lake Tahoe. It was put together, and it was Dr. Whiteley was in that first medical building in South Lake Tahoe. So you start there, and then you walk toward the lake, and you'll see this building. It's now known as the Visitor Center. It used to be the South Tahoe Chamber of Commerce, but before that, it was the old county jail. And if you go in that building right now, you can see the old bars are still there. The jail bars are still there. The cells are still there. They're not in use, but they're still. And the sheriff department still has the keys to that. And that building was remodeled. And the architect who did the remodeling of that particular building after they got out of the jail told them that they can build it exactly to specs, and he would give the plans to them for $1. If they changed one thing, he was going to charge them $10,000. And they didn't change one thing, and that's what the building is now. But that was the old jail. as you walk right out of the historical museum, and it's just a few yards. And a little bit further down the road is mile marker number 59. Now I do have a mile marker presentation, and mile marker 59 means you're about 59 miles from Placerville. And these mile markers are all the way down from South Lake Tahoe to Placerville. Mile marker number 1 is in Placerville, and it comes up. They're on the right side of the road as you're coming toward Tahoe. And you can see there's about 70 or 80% of those still available to see. And you can see mile marker number 59 right at the Tallac Avenue stoplight. So if you use that stoplight, that's the mile marker you'll see. And you can cross the street there using the stoplight and walk away from the lake as you get on the other side of the street, and you'll see the 1936 California Meat Market. But it was later known as the Al Tahoe Market. See, Al Sprague, who had the facility, the resort here at the Al Tahoe Inn, he had to get a place for people to buy the groceries when they got to Tahoe. It was a summer-only business because people didn't stay year-round in Tahoe till way after World War II. But he needed a place for them to buy groceries. And so when he put this building up, it was known as the California Meat Market. And it's still standing, portions of this actually. Later on, the meat market became the Al Tahoe Market, and then further down was his the Al Tahoe Inn. It was a motor inn. Just had a few rooms. It had a lounge and a place people can enjoy dinner, breakfast, or lunch. And that building is still there today. And here's another picture of the Hotel Globins in Al Tahoe. A portion of this building is still up, and you can see that right off the Highway 50. And what it looks like now is a facility called Rojo's. It's a restaurant, still run as a restaurant, same building, it's been there for a long time. And you can see the flat top here. There was a fire in 1956 which burned most of the buildings, at least the top part of it. And when they replaced there's still a couple stories in that building, but they just took the roof off. So what you're seeing now is the same structure as the California Meat Market, but without the slanted roof. But this part here is still running as a business as Rojo's. And there's another picture of Rojo's. You can go in there and have a fine lunch and dinner. And as we go a little bit further down to San Francisco Avenue, which is right where Rojo's is, you'll see the Tahoe Daily Tribune building. And this is what it looks like from Highway 50. And on the side of this building, you'll see, well, there's another picture of the front of Tahoe Daily Tribune building. But on the side of it, on San Francisco Avenue, is a mural that depicts the 1909 Al Tahoe Inn. And here's what it looks like. And that's what Mr. Al Sprague and Elmira in 1909 put right in that area. And you see 3 stories with that widow's walk on top. And that's the depiction of that. And if you go down San Francisco Avenue on the Tahoe Daily Tribune building, you'll see that. The murals were put there, that's on the Lake Tahoe Historical Society building and the Tahoe Daily Tribune building, and about 9 or 10 other places throughout South Lake Tahoe. They put murals up in the early 2000s. The Lake Tahoe Chamber of Commerce and the Historical Society put about 9 or 10 of them up, and there's a tour you can go see the different murals in South Lake Tahoe. But this is the one we're interested in at this time. As we walk down San Francisco Avenue and get onto Alameda, and in site number 6, you'll see the Pioneer Cemetery. There's a cemetery in Al Tahoe. Most people who even live in Al Tahoe don't even know that there's a cemetery down there. But this is the sign of the old historic Al Tahoe cemetery. You'll see a few names that I've already mentioned. Thomas Rowland, he was the man that owned most of that property. And he was the manager of Rowland's. He's buried there. And a few of the Barton families that are buried in this old historic cemetery. If you go a little bit further, at the end of Alameda Avenue, you continue to look away from the state line, away from Nevada, you can see some of the old trail that went through the Tahoe area. So again, here we go with the old 1925 map, and there's the old grid, and I have some cars on the old grid going down Pioneer Trail, and that's what most of the people did. They went through Pioneer Trail, but on occasion, if they wanted to stay at Lake House or at Rollins, they had to do a diversion, and they would go down to the lake and stay at the Lake House, and later called Rollins. And that was the majority of the traffic would go that way. But then in 1930, the new grid came in, and they took off the old road, and they're now traveling to State Line with this 1930-1931 highway. They actually started the highway in 1929, and it actually didn't get paved until 1931. So from 29 to 31, the new road has taken over, and they've widened the new road. This would be the road that you would drive on if you came to South Lake Tahoe at this time. It's known as Highway 50, or it's also known as Lake Tahoe Boulevard, same street. But you can see how it changed the routing of the traffic. And if you know where the old Al Tahoe Inn, when Mr. Globins bought the place, it is not on the main highway. So he built his little hotel restaurant out there, and to help people get to the area. But as you're on Alameda Avenue, looking away from the State Line area, and crossing Bellevue Avenue, you can see the old trail that the new grid just went over, and it goes right down to the lake. That's where the old trail is, where those blue dots are. And there's really nothing there to walk on. It's just an old trail. You can get to the lake using that trail. And you can see how the trail is outlined here. In this area of Lake Tahoe was a former Indian campsite. A lot of Indians stayed there. It was out in the meadow, and they fished there, and they gathered a lot of things, and actually had their summer camps. And this whole area, this whole meadow area, was active cattle grazing up until 2001. And about 11 years ago, we had active cattle grazing here in the South Shore. Well, we're going to go into number 8. Number 8 is the current Goodrich House. This is the last standing structure of that Rollins town I was talking about a little bit earlier. It was the old 1876 cobbler barn. When Rollins left, most of the houses went over to Bijou, but this cobbler barn stayed, and the Goodrich family took over in 1876 and started to make a house out of it, and they're still living in the house today. And it's a beautiful little house, and that's what it looks like close to 4th of July. Just a beautiful little house, last standing structure of the town of Rollins. And there weren't many structures, and that's the last one. Number 9 is the area where Lake House was. Again, we don't recommend people going to that area and to see Lake House, because there's absolutely nothing there. Not even most of the trees are gone, and from that particular area. But that's where it was. As we continue to look at the history of the Lake House, this is a picture of the Lake House in 1861, and it's up here. But people who live in Lake Tahoe would note that this area is usually covered with water to about this high most of the years, unless there's a drought year. And when there's a drought year, you can see this area here, where they had a little barn, they had boats out to here, and they had some cattle out there. And the reason you don't see that anymore is because since 1870, they put a dam on the Truckee River, and that raised the water of Lake Tahoe and literally flooded this area. So they had to take all these out in 1870, and that's why one reason we know that this picture is older than 1870. And here's the oldest photo of the Lake House area. It had a little dock out here, and you can see Mount Talac in the background. Now this picture actually came from those little stereoscopes that when I was a young man we used to put looked like postcard size pictures, and there was always 2 of them, and you'd put them in a stereoscope and it would look like it's 3D. And this is one picture of those 3D stereoscopic photos. And this is the oldest photo I have. And down here it says, a view on Lakeshore, the lake house. And so that's the oldest picture that we have. But here's a map of South Lake Tahoe, where is 1886. In this little place right here, you can see on the map called Rollins. And you can see the road that was here. You don't see any other part of Al Tahoe here, but that's where this is where Al Tahoe is going to be. But that's where the Rollins. That's the map of that shows where Rollins was. So let's talk a little bit about Mr. Rollins. Thomas F. Rollins. He was born in 1831 in Thomas, Corinth, Corinth, Vermont. That's where he was born, in Vermont. He ended up as the Strawberry House owner in 1867. As we go from Tahoe to Placerville, you'll pass Strawberry. And he was the owner of that in 1867. He purchases the lake house in 1868, and he renames it on the maps as Roland. And his wife was named Sophrona. And there was big parties. Mr. Roland knew how to market, and he knew how to throw big parties. He would all the A-list. It would be like a Hollywood A-list, where they'd be the only ones that would be invited. They'd have a couple of parties a year, and they were just grand and talked about for the rest of the year. What went on with at those parties. He built a custom house over the water. It was a little chalet over the water. He built a pier. He put a little house out there, and it'd be a little bar and saloon and restaurant there. And he was a fishing expert. He still has the record of most fish coming out of Lake Tahoe in pounds in one day, in a few hours. And he just knew how to fish, and he sold a lot of fish. He became the member of the Assembly of the 23rd District in Alpine County and El Dorado County. So he's the Assembly member of two counties, a very well-respected man in our community, and he did that until his passing in 1883. So here's a picture of the custom house and saloon with, in 1876, we know the water came up to where the piers were, and because of the dam at the North Shore. That's what it looks like. As we go down and we continue our hike on this Who's Al of Al Tahoe, we stop at Thomas F. Reagan Memorial City Beach. Now you need to know that this is, many people think this is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's last name was past President Ronald Reagan, and Governor of the state of California spells Reagan differently. But this is Thomas F. Reagan. He was a man in our community that was well respected. He served as the president of the Lake Tahoe Area Council, and that was a prelude to the TRPA. So he was very active in trying to keep as an environmentalist. He was the president of the board of trustees at the local hospital here at Barton Memorial Hospital in South Lake Tahoe. He was the president of the Lake Tahoe Country Club. He was the member of the El Dorado County Grand Jury. He was a member of the El Dorado County Planning Commission. He was a member of the El Dorado Chamber of Commerce. He was the president of the Lake Tahoe Rotary Club at one time. He was the president of the South Lake Tahoe Chamber of Commerce. He was El Dorado County representative to Lake Tahoe, the Bi-State Study Committee, which eventually became TRPA. And he had many other organizations, and his whole life was dedicated to improving Lake Tahoe. So they named that beach after him, and wonderfully. And if you go down on the beach, you'll see this area where a lot of people can park and get right next to the lake and have a great time. As we go down further towards State Line on our walk, we run into a Globin Chalet and Pier. And here's an aerial view of the pier right off of Sacramento Avenue. And you can see how the pier goes way out in the lake. And this is one of the longest piers in Lake Tahoe. And the reason they had to go that long is to get to the boats that used to circumnavigate Lake Tahoe. And if there was a drought year, the water would recede to sand almost all the way out there. So they had to build a real long pier. and people had a real long walk after they got off the boat to get to Globin's, but that's where it was. And here's a picture of what it looked like. That was the Globin's Chalet, and there were a lot of dances went on in there. A lot of big bands in the 40s and the 50s played there. Count Basie is one of the big bands, and many others. And it was kids could go there for homecomings and all kinds of things. Mr. Globin was very involved with the community. As we walk down Sacramento Avenue, we go and get to where the Al Tahoe Inn was built. Let me give you a few pictures of Al Tahoe Inn and talk a little bit about Almarin Sprague and his wife Almira. Very interesting gentleman. In 1851, he was born in Racine, California. He was a principal in 1877 for a high school. In 1898, he filed for a inkwell patent. Very creative man, and he got the patent. And became a farmer in 1896 in Del Sur, California, in Southern California. And he became a manager of the California Deciduous Fruit Association. That was in Los Angeles in 1898. And then he moved to Sacramento, where the state capital was, in 1903, and he became the manager of California Fresh Fruit Association. And then he, in 1906, he had got another patent for temperature regulation of perishable items. So a very creative man, very inventive, and he moves up to Lake Tahoe in 1909 and builds the Al Tahoe Inn. Now you got to remember, he didn't stay year-round. This Tahoe was not year-round during those 1909, early 1900s. Didn't become year-round for many, many people until after World War II. Very few people stayed. There's some people did, but not many. In 1920, he moves out of the Tahoe area. He moves down to Southern California in 1920, and then in 1942 he passes in San Diego. But this is a picture of the home of the fruit industry in Sacramento, California. If you go close to the state capitol, you'll see this building here, and it's pretty large. And this is one of the things that Al Sprague, who the name Al Tahoe is named after, is he did a lot of business in Sacramento, and he built the Al Tahoe Hotel in 1909. If you look at the history books, and you can see at the bottom of this picture, it's called Liberty Inn. It had several names, and one of the names was Liberty Inn. It was also known as Al Tahoe Hotel. But you can see how large that structure is in this area. And if you remember back when we started the presentation, on the South Tahoe Daily Tribune building, this is what it looked like in color. And so that's the depiction of what we see as the Al Tahoe Inn. But here's some older photos. It was a nice area. This is a photo in about 1915. A lot of things you can play, tennis and other things you can do when you came to Lake Tahoe. And now let's talk a little bit about Frank Globin. He was actually Italian. His real name was Globinini, and his wife Esther. And he was in 1890. He was born in San Francisco. In 1917, he owned the Riverside Inn Cafe, and on Riverside Road in Sacramento, across the street from the bathhouses. Now we don't have any pictures of this Riverside Road Riverside Inn Cafe, but we do have pictures of the bathhouses. He ends up purchasing in 1924 the Al Tahoe Inn from Al Sprague. Now the Riverside Inn Cafe is real close to what's now known as Highway 50, where it crosses over the Sacramento River, which is not far from the Capitol. So though we don't have any records that Mr. Globin and Mr. Sprague knew each other, other than through this purchase of the Al Tahoe Inn, they weren't very far from one another in the Sacramento area. And we're talking not far from one another, within a half mile of that area. So the Riverside Inn Cafe was real close to that fruit building we saw earlier. They built the chalet in 1929 at the end of Sacramento Street that we already saw pictures of. In 1930s, Mr. Globin constructed that California Meat Market. That's that flat roof rectangular building that we see now attached to Rojo's, and that was burned in 1956. He later added the Globe and Al Tahoe Hotel, bar and restaurant, which is Rojo's. During his time, it was a small business complex. It had a gas station, it had a grocery store and bar, it had a restaurant. History tells that a former Sacramento neighbor, a man named Max Baer, he was one-time heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He trained up here in Lake Tahoe at Mr. Globin's hotel for an upcoming bout. So Globin and Sprague and actually Max Baer all lived within a mile of one another down in the Sacramento area, right off the Sacramento River. But here's a picture of the old bathhouses in Sacramento. Now, if you know anything about the Sutro bathhouses in San Francisco, this was the complement of the Sutro bathhouses, but this was in Sacramento. And it was these bathhouses where Mr. Globin put his Riverside Inn Cafe there. So we don't have any pictures of this cafe, but right across the street were these bathhouses, and big bathhouses to cool people off in the summertime in Sacramento. And so here's a picture of the 1924 Globin's Al Tahoe Inn. You can see where Sacramento Avenue is going out into Lake Tahoe, and there's a nice black and white to show you that three-story building with that widow's walk on top. Now there's some other things that happen in that same area, and you'll see a lot of little cabins, and we call them the Globin cabins. They're about 900 square feet, and if you go in the South Tahoe area, you'll see many of them. There's a stonemason that put these together for Mr. Globin. His name was Frank Fernandez, and he was thought to do most of the work. But my understanding of how the bricks were done is when Mr. Fernandez had extra brick from building another building somewhere in the area, he would always order too many bricks, and they would save those bricks and eventually build a Globin cabin. And so you'll see during some of these buildings, you'll see rocks in these walls, brick walls. You'll see different sized bricks in these walls. So there were many of them were from different projects that had extra bricks, and they were put together and put the Globin cabins together. And you'll see dozens of these. And the other thing about the Globin cabins, right across the street from the Al Tahoe Inn, there's a group of Globin cabins were built right on the street, and in their backyard was a swimming pool where they would all share that one swimming pool. And the swimming pool is still there, but it's just covered up. But the Globin cabins are still there, and they're still being used on a daily basis. And so after the Globin cabins, you walk down Tlac Avenue, you cross Highway 50, and you finish at the Lake Tahoe Historical Society building. And that place at the Historical Society building, you'll be able to see mile marker number 60 right outside. And this project was put together. We now at the Lake Tahoe Historical Society have a pamphlet where you can go to the Society building, pick up the pamphlet. I think it's going to be about $5, and you can take this walk yourself and look at all the historical sites through Al Tahoe. It was put together through a lot of folks. My wife Karen Borges helped me, Dave Wakeman, Joan and Dick Young, Dave Antonucci, Gary Franklin, Bob Harms, Diane Johnson, who's putting the booklet together, Lynn Bajuk, who was the past president of the Historical Society, a man named John Sepler, who lives in the area, Carolyn Myers, who lived in Tahoe for many years, Kim Coppell, Randy Pershawn, the Scudder family, and many others of the Lake Tahoe Historical Society board members that helped out, and others are not mentioned. So I want to thank you for joining me with learning about who's Al of Al Tahoe. This is Dave Borges. I want to thank you.
The trail to Round Lake and Dardanelles Lake is part of the Tahoe Rim Trail and takes you across streams and through beautiful open meadows. You will see large volcanic boulders on your hike to Round Lake. The cliffs that surround Round Lake make this especially captivating with its mysterious beauty. The hike to Dardanelles Lake is equally rewarding. To get there, take Highway 50 to Myers and turn left onto Highway 89. Travel up Luther Pass until you see a brown sign on your left that will say Big Meadows Trailhead. Pay close attention so you don't miss it. The entrance splits. There are 2 parking lots. Take the one to your left, as this is where our trailhead will be. The hike to Round Lake is 2.7 miles. Dardanelles is 3.4 miles and has an elevation change of 800 feet. Don't let that number fool you, because you do have to do some climbing on these hikes. We rate both hikes moderate and highly recommend either one for an experience you can treasure forever. The trail starts on the other side of the highway. The Forest Service has recently restored this part of the trail. The new trail is more forgiving than the old trail, and we're grateful to the Forest Service for their constant upkeep on our trails and welcome the energy that the Tahoe Rim Trail has brought to the area. Soon we reach the trail marker for Scotts Lake. Stay to the right for Round Lake and Dardanelles Lake. Wide open spaces now as we cross the bridge with the stream flowing beneath. We have reached Big Meadows, surrounded by these majestic mountains and filled with wildflowers, birds singing, and skies so blue you cannot believe it. We enter the forest again and say goodbye for now to Big Meadow. Hope you have your mosquito repellent on. They can get thick at this end of the meadow for some reason. Wildflowers are a treat for our eyes as they grace the sides of our trail. There are a lot of lupins and mules deer on this part of the trail. At the top, we run into another hiker on her return trip. Dallas waits for us at the bottom of the ridge by the trail marker to make sure we go in the right direction. Meese Meadows, Round Lake to the left. Soon we come upon some volcanic rock beds that look prehistoric. The trail winds through the volcanic rocks, and a short distance from here we reach our destination. Round Lake in its entire splendor. David takes a minute to enjoy the view. They stocked this lake with cutthroat trout a few years ago. Go ahead, try your luck. We are. David's all set to catch a fish. The cliffs that surround this lake are incredible. You can imagine what nature has hidden in some of those caves. Well, time for some lunch. Since the fish don't seem to be hungry, we sure are. Can you think of a better way to spend your day? Back at the trail marker, at the bottom of the ridge, take a right to Dardanelles Lake. The trail marker will say Christmas Valley. A short distance down the trail, and you will come to the trail marker that says Dardanelles Lake to your left. You immediately cross the first stream. The next stream is a short distance from the first. There is a log to help you cross here. We greet some backpackers coming back from an overnight campout at Dardanelles Lake. We pass by this giant lily pond and continue on the trail with the stream below us for a while. Dallas found the water. The meadows offer a colorful arrangement of wildflowers in the summer. After we climb up these last rocks, we will be at our destination. Here we are at beautiful Dardanelles Lake. We continue on the trail to the right to get to our favorite spot. We like to make our destination these sloping flat granite rocks. There's some campers over on those rocks. This is a good swimming lake. Take a dip. You'll get refreshed in a hurry. This is such a beautiful lake. We could not have chosen a better way to spend our day. The hike to Winnemucca and Round Top Lakes is famous for the wildflowers as well as the spectacular views of Caples Lake. Lake Winnemucca is 2 miles, Round Top is 3 miles from here on a well-maintained trail. This is a rather easy hike because to Winnemucca Lake we get to start at the top, which is 8,563 feet, and our destination is 8,980 feet, which means only moderate climbing is involved with outrageous views and wonderful wildflowers. Round Top sits at an elevation of 9,420 feet, therefore making the hike to the top rather strenuous, but the views are well worth the effort. To get there, take Highway 89 at Myers to the junction of Highway 88 in Hope Valley. Turn right at the junction and travel to the top of Carson Pass. You are required to pay a fee to park. This is a very popular trailhead and always busy. The Pacific Crest Trail intersects here. The Little Log Cabin, usually open, offers information on the area. We will greet a lot of fellow hikers along this trail. In case you're tired, you can rest a while in this seat nature made, like Michelle is doing. Elephant's Back is where Captain Fremont first saw Lake Tahoe while crossing the Carson Pass with his troops in 1844. Frogs Lake is only 1 mile in and is a very pleasant spot to stop and swim and have your picnic if that's all the hiking you want to do today. However, we're going on to Winnemucca and Round Top Lakes. As we leave Frogs Lake and adventure on to Lake Winnemucca, we see a few of our fellow hikers on the trail. Just up the trail you have this splendid view of Caples Lake below us. It resembles the shape of a heart, wouldn't you agree? Here at the trail marker you can take a left and continue on the Pacific Crest Trail, or go right and on to Lake Winnemucca, which is just 1 mile from the marker. Now the wildflowers are abundant. This trail offers the best wildflowers in the area in my opinion. Hiking is so pleasant, especially when you get a treat like this. Summer months are the best time to enjoy the spectacular wildflowers on this hike. Michelle takes time to enjoy one of the many spectacular views offered on this hike. Here's a snow patch, which the dogs sure seem to be enjoying. That'll cool them off. Just beyond the snow patch, we reach Lake Winnemucca. These meadows are so beautiful. The dogs were sure ready for a swim. Find yourself a spot and have a picnic, relax, and enjoy nature at its best. The colors of these blue skies are magnificent. Keep your eyes peeled for some red-tailed hawks as they frequent the area. After a short rest and a snack, we're ready to continue on to Round Top, which is less than a mile from here. Just past the small grove of evergreens, we cross Woods Creek. The log offered you is rather wide and flat. Let's get started up this climb of 400 feet in less than 7/10 of a mile. Don't get discouraged. The views are well worth the effort. We start climbing immediately. Oh look, there's someone sliding down the snow patch. While you're climbing, don't forget to stop and check out the vistas. Looking back at Elephant's Back and Lake Winnemucca, you can see why you might choose to continue on this trail. Now, we're almost to the top. Seems like this is the hardest part. Once at the top, the trail levels off. We travel along this flat part of the trail until we reach Round Top Lake. Wildflowers are still abundant at this altitude. Maybe we should jump in like Dallas. With the snow still on the mountains, you can bet the water's very cold. Lake Margaret is a special hike because of all the meadows and streams you hike through. There are wildflowers everywhere, sometimes fully embracing you. Lake Margaret is a shallow lake and therefore makes for a good swimming lake. To get there, drive to Caples Lake on Highway 88 towards Kirkwood. When you pass Caples Spillway, pay close attention and look for a yellow arrow on your right, then turn right at the dirt road. Parking is limited, so get here early. Lake Margaret is just over 2 miles and there's not a lot of climbing, some difficulties, but this hike is not strenuous. As we start our adventure, we cross over these granite slabs. Follow the trail signs. This trail has been rerouted recently. We have to cross several streams on our way to Lake Margaret. After you've crossed the first stream, the meadow opens up and the spillover from Caples makes for a great fun swim for Dallas. It also offers great fly fishing and you can camp right here. Just look at the wildflowers. They give us enjoyment all along the trail. At the second stream, we come to the log. Just hop on and cross the stream. Sam and Amanda don't care to walk over logs, so they'll wade to the other side. Amanda brought her rock socks with her. We better get started up the trail. We pass by this small pond and, oh no, it's starting to rain. We'll hold up here for a bit until it stops. We hike through the high flowers and meet fellow hikers. We're almost to the lake, just over these rocks, and we'll be there. These fellow hikers are just returning from Lake Margaret. We reach the top of the rocks, and just beyond here is Lake Margaret. We just relax and enjoy the view. There's some swimmers over there. They'll be refreshed for the hike back. The Mount Tallac hike is the granddaddy of them all. This hike is so spectacular with inspirational views all the way to the top. It's 5.5 miles long, and you'll gain over 3,000 feet in elevation. Therefore, you had better be in shape for this one and get an early start, as you'll be exposed to the sun on the last half of the hike. Do you have your sunscreen and mosquito repellent on? To get there, travel 3.7 miles from the Y on Highway 89. Approximately 1/2 mile after you go over the bridge for Taylor Creek, you will see a brown forest sign on your right with Mount Tallac Trailhead on it. Just after that, you will make a left turn on the road across from the Baldwin Beach entrance. Parking is free at this trailhead. You are required to fill out and carry a permit for this hike because this is an entrance to Desolation Wilderness and is a very popular trailhead. The first section of this trail is where Al Gore hiked when he visited Tahoe when he was vice president. The trail becomes rocky as you climb to the top of the first ridge, where you have these fantastic views with Fallen Leaf Lake just below us and Lake Tahoe visible just beyond. You cannot take too much water when making this hike. A power snack will be perfect for extra energy, and fruit is always beneficial. Planning and having enough supplies will make your adventure more pleasurable. We reach the top of the first ridge and continue on to the other side of the ridge. Here is our Desolation Wilderness sign, and just beyond it is our first stop at Floating Island Lake. This is a very picturesque lake. We'll stop here, relax, and have a snack before continuing to the top. As we leave Floating Island, we start up the trail towards Cathedral Lake, which is a little under a mile from here. We still have the forest for our shade, and that's greatly appreciated. We cross the stream just before we reach Cathedral Lake. We stop here for a short rest and a little power snack. This large group is also going to the top today. See you there. Once out of the forest, the views become awesome. David stops to take a drink of water and catch his breath while taking in the panoramic views. The climb to the top is relentless now. You're exposed to the sun and traveling over these shale rocks. No pain, no gain. However, our efforts reward us with these spectacular views. Here, the trail splits. If you go right, the rocks and climb are dangerous. Stay to the left. The trail is more forgiving. Once we reach the top, we have to stop and take in the views. You have 1 more mile until you reach the summit. The wildflowers on this side of the mountain are beautiful, and we have views of Desolation Wilderness. Louisiana has a little snack while taking in the views. That's Aloha Lake over there. Now we're getting close to the top of this masterpiece. We make a turn to the right at the trail marker. Rewards, rewards. At the top, we have all the marvelous splendor and beauty of Lake Tahoe. A picnic at the top is well deserved. Table with a view? Gilmore Lake looks inviting. Ah, the wonderful generosity of nature. It's ours to enjoy. The air is so sweet, and why shouldn't it be? It is the same air the angels breathe. Once you have mastered the hike to the top, you can put your name in the box with all the others who have enjoyed this adventure. No dogs today. This hike is too hard on their paws. My paws too. Ouch!